There we go. Hello, I'm Dave. I think most of you in the room probably spoken to me, seen me, had me on site before. Thank you very much for all coming today. It's been a long day, lots of information to divulge, but this should take about 45 minutes. And as you probably all know by now, I quite like doing my technical demos and showing you what you can do with some of the technology that's available. So, a bit of an introduction. I'm the technical director at Medhurst. I have been for the last 7.5 years, and I look after the technical teams for education and also our commercial customers. I look after our cloud and hosting systems. So those of you that use our systems, I head that department up and have that responsibility. I also write a lot of technical guides now. So going into schools and colleges, we find that most installations, bearing in mind things like Hyper-V, storage and switching, tend to be very uniform. You're ending up with the same goal. So we're writing a lot of guides now to make sure that everything's the same and everything's predictable to give you, the best possible solutions. And I also look after project management. So that's a little bit about me. And before I dive in, I know on the agenda for today, we've had a lot of Windows 10 and people have heard about Office 365 and the advantages of moving to that and using it. And as a compliment, I wanted to do a bit of the news, a bit like Top Gear, but hopefully without the political consequences. But I wanted to give you 3 really good bits of news today. After doing a summer of installations and seeing new products coming online, just wanted to sort of give you this information. So, hands up who's got one of those? MSA 2040? I know you have, Mike. You should have your hand up. So, who's got an MSA? Who's bought into the HP entry-level storage or SAN storage? Okay, so we're all reasonably familiar. Very similar to the Dell Equalogics and the lower-end storage systems. And that's where this particular product has been targeted in the past. We've had products with us, for example, EVA, that's been in the enterprise space for a long time. And over the last sort of couple of years, we've seen 3PAR, which is an acquisition again by HP, which are bringing those enterprise features into the sort of not small enterprise, but certainly the medium enterprise. And what HP have done with this product, it's a product's been with us, it's in its 4th generation now. It's a dual controller storage system, and they have released this year GL200 firmware. So let me tell you what this gives you. This is a firmware, it's a free firmware update from HP, but it adds some really, really important features to this unit. So the first one, sub-LUN tiering, okay? Not to be confused with orienteering, which is what I used to do in the Scouts when I was young. And I wasn't very good at it. Hopefully I'll be better at this. So let's talk about sub-LUN tiering. So without going too much into this, an MSA, you normally define RAID arrays, and then you carve those RAID arrays up with volumes, okay? And when those volumes are filled up, you either add more space to your RAID arrays, or if you've run out of RAID, or run out of capacity on that RAID array, then you start a new one, okay? What we can do now, the MSA, with this new storage, it will look at the sort of storage you've got in your storage units, in the MSA chassis. So we all know we can put SAS disks into the MSA, and these are typically small form factor. We can now support 1.8 terabyte disks at 10K in these enclosures. And it also supports a midline tier. So this is a small form factor unit. You can buy a large form factor unit, or you can buy large form factor enclosures that bolt onto the bottom to extend this platform. And those drives, the large form factor drives are the midline SAS, what we probably all refer to as SATA class before. Okay, and what this technology does, it allows the MSA to look at the workloads that are going on these volumes, okay? And it will look at those workloads and work out which of those workloads are considered hot, i.e. data that's being accessed all of the time, data that's warm, i.e. data that's being accessed once a day or so, and data that's cold, the document you downloaded from HP 3 years ago and is sat in your downloads folder, that sort of thing. So what this technology allows the storage to do is to manipulate those blocks and put them in the right tier. Okay, so we've now got storage tiering out of the box with the MSA. Now I'll build on that a little bit more in a minute. The second feature I want to sort of talk about is thin provisioning. It's there, it's more of a service provider feature. This is where you can say I've got 10 terabytes, but I want to create a 1 petabyte disk and present that to a host or an entity. Very much a hosting provider thing, but it's there, it's available, so you can over-provision what you actually have on disk. Okay, and the really big one, the one that I really am excited about, and this ties in really well with sublun tiering, is wide striping. So as we know, in our normal storage arrays, we have, as I just said, a RAID array, and you carve that up into a volume or volumes, and you know what that's going to give you in the way of IOPS and the way of megabytes per second because you've done your calculations and you know it's going to do that. So you might have your SAS layer, you might have a midline SAS layer, sorry, midline SATA layer, and you use them as you need to until they get filled up. What wide striping does is it uses something called virtual disks. So when you create your volume now, your volume stripes whatever RAID arrays you have put into a pool. Really, really important. So now your limits on storage have suddenly gone. Okay, so before, let's take a RAID 10 on the MSA, which is probably the best fit for virtualization. That had a limit of 16 disks. Okay, so with 1.2 terabyte disks, you're about 10 terabytes of RAID 10 storage. Okay, that's what you could achieve. So now you could have multiple arrays, and your virtual disks could span all of them, or some of them, and that's what this performance tiering feature does. Okay, so you can now create RAID arrays or volumes up to 128 terabytes. Okay, so if anyone manages to do that, let me know, because I've never seen one. But on paper, that's what we can do. Okay, again, out of the box with this firmware, something called SSD read cache. So we can all now go out and buy SSDs for our SANs and our desktops and our host hardware. But what we can do with the SSD read cache, we can introduce SSD disks and use them as additional read cache on the controllers in the SAN. So the controllers in the SAN by default come with 4 gigabytes each, 4 gigabytes of RAM. We can now really extend that. So all of this data that's always being read, the hot data, instead of it being brought from disk, it's in this read cache. So of course, you can buy 400 or 500 gig SSDs and assign them. That's a lot of read cache in comparison to the 4 gig that you've got on the controllers. Okay, now that's all out of the box with this firmware. HP won't charge you for that at all. There is one license you can buy called a performance tiering license. And what this will allow you to do is to take your SSD disks, constitute a RAID array, a 10, a 6, a 5, or whatever you want to have, and you put that in your pool with your SAS disks and your midline disks. And it then creates you a 3-tier storage pool that your volumes can span across. So in essence now, your hot data goes to SSD and is blisteringly quick. Your warm data stays on SAS typically, and your cold data goes down to the midline tier. Okay? So come and see me afterwards if you want to have a talk about this. So by default, if you've got a 2040 and your firmware is less than GL200, go and get the firmware, put it on, and it will work out of the box. There is, does anybody recognize that? That's the old V2 interface. It's still with the 2040. They've still kept it in there. What you've got to do is go up to your address bar and put V2 at the end of it. Otherwise, by default, you'll get the V3 interface, which is very, very new, very easy to understand, very easy to use. And the one thing that they've absolutely and brilliantly with this firmware is performance monitoring. I think we'll all agree that the MSA's had a go at it in the past, but we've always had to rely on third-party applications to provide that information. So the storage unit now will do such a huge amount of performance monitoring. It will tell us IOPS, it will tell us virtual pool usage, it will show us vDisk usage, individual drive usage, and that's all built into the product. Okay, so great news. I would strongly suggest that you have a good look at that. Right, Veeam news. So I think at the last Medhurst day, we told you a little bit about Cloud Connect. It's a very new technology from Veeam. Who's got Veeam? Anybody? Hey, brilliant. So you've all got a server, you've got Veeam, you're backing up your VMware machines or your Hyper-V machines, and if you have an off-site requirement, it'll probably be something like tape, another disk system in a different building, maybe a USB drive, something like that. So the good news for Medhurst, we've been a Veeam partner for a long time now. We're now a cloud provider. And to sort of explain this nice and quickly, that gives us a number of things that we can give you guys, or we can do for you guys. Really good one, we can rent the software to you now. You don't need to go and buy Veeam. So if you're looking at Veeam, or you're coming up to a renewal maybe, or something along those lines, you don't have to perpetually go and purchase this now. We can rent this to you monthly, okay? We can also rent you the hardware. This is on a monthly as well, so we can rent you, anything we rent you from a Veeam hardware point of view will be fault tolerant, so we haven't got to worry about disks failing. And it's anything from a small form factor DC8000 for smaller installations, all the way up to something like an ML310 or an ML350, which is designed to hold a lot of storage. And then on top of that, we have our Veeam Cloud Connect piece, which we manage and maintain from our data center. So we have a presence in Poole, data center called C4L. So when you're sending your machines to us, the data is in the UK. It can be encrypted in flight if you want. And it's very, very easy to get to. If you wanted it in a hurry, we could be down there within half an hour with a USB disk and have your data out. Okay? So 3 things that are really, really valuable. So we can rent you the software, we can rent you the hardware, and we can send you machines to the cloud. Okay, so if you'd like some more information about that, please come and have a chat with me, and we can give you a quotation and talk to you a bit more about it. Right, that's the news. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. Sorry. Ooh, Server 2016 news. I thought that was the slide before. Right, so you've all heard a bit about Windows 10 this morning. Do we all like Windows 10? Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I really, really like it. My kids like it, and I find that's quite a good yardstick these days. If your kids like it, you're on a winner. So, Server 2016 news. How many 2012 R2 users here? Most people, okay. Who had a nightmare upgrading from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2? No? I know you didn't, Gavin, because I did it. But it's always been an offline procedure. It's not something that you can roll through. It's something that you have to install a new cluster. There's a migration process that swings the machines over while they're offline, and then you bring everything up and you're back on again. So that's been the case for quite a few versions of failover clustering. But the great news today is that they're now supported. Now you can install 2016 servers into your 2012 R2 clusters, and they will function on what's called a cluster operating system rolling upgrade. So in short, what that means is you introduce your servers, and your cluster will now have something called a functional level, very similar to Active Directory, where you upgrade it from 2008 to 2012 or R2. So your cluster, when you introduce 2016 hosts, will have a functional level. So once you've removed your last 2012 R2 host, you can raise the cluster functional level, and you're there. You've done your migration. Beauty of this is no downtime. It can be done without losing service to anything. Okay, second, hot add RAM. Oh, this is good. Now, I know we've been able to do this with dynamic RAM. We can increase it on the fly. We haven't been able to decrease it because that hasn't been supported. But what we can do now, regardless of whether the configuration in your virtual machine is static, i.e. you've set 4 gig of RAM, which is what the machine gets, or whether it's dynamic, where you can say you start with 1 gig and you can grow to 4 gig, both of those now can be changed on the fly with Server 2016. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're using Gen 1 or Gen 2 machines. The prerequisites are 2016 hypervisor, and your operating system in the guest must be 2016. But it does mean that if you have an under-resourced server that's taking a bit of a kicking in the middle of the day, with 2016, you can now add that RAM and take advantage of that performance boost without having to take that machine down and reconfigure it. So a really useful feature. Hot add VNix. Another useful feature when it comes to things like clustering. So I know a few people here. Who's doing in-guest clustering with Hyper-V? Anybody at the moment? So you can do, I think we talked a little bit last time about having, instead of the traditional host storage, physical bits of kit, you can now have virtual machine, shared virtual hard disks. Okay, so we can virtualize in guest. And one of the advantages of hot add VNix is, again, if we have clusters that require more network capability, we can just add virtual networking to them while they're working without outages, which is a very, very nice thing to be able to do. And this is one I've been waiting for a long time, the live resizing of your shared VHDX disk. So previously with guest clustering, we can have shared disks and we can have clusters, but if we ever wanted to resize those shared disks, we had to take the entire cluster down to do that, which was okay, but it was disruptive, and it was the sort of thing that kept you guys at school past 6 in the evening when PCs aren't needed. So the ability to now resize that on the fly is brilliant. So I can't stress enough, if possible, for certainly things like file services and SQL services, if possible, start to use in-guest clustering. It means if you lose a VM, you don't lose the service that's behind it because there are multiple hosts. Okay. Last one, integration services. So whenever we've upgraded our hypervisor before, we've always had to go in and update the integration services to ensure things like the in-guest VSS works properly and that the hypervisor can talk to the virtual machine properly. And these are now going to be delivered through Windows Update. So as long as your Windows Update patching regime is in place and working, you haven't got to worry about upgrading your virtual machine's integration services after you've upgraded to 2016. Okay, right, that is the end of the news. So now, the question I want you guys to consider this afternoon or for the rest of the afternoon, can you predict what's going to go wrong today, tomorrow, or next week? Okay, I think we're going to talk about proactive monitoring here. Now, we've all got all sorts of things in our environment, which I'll come to in a minute, but because of the breadth and depth of what we're trying to manage, it can be very, very difficult to find what's going to go wrong next, okay? And that's what I'm going to try and address this afternoon. So I'm going to show you a piece of software called Operations Manager. Has anybody used it? Anybody got it? One person, okay, that's brilliant. So that means I can tell you all about it. So it's a product that's been around for a very long time. It was bought by Microsoft around the year 2000. And as you can see, I've put some history on the board here. It's a very well-established product now. It's not a new thing. It's in the System Center suite now. So chances are, you guys, if you've bought System Center, you've already got Operations Manager. You just probably haven't put it on yet. Okay, so we're now at, there's a technical preview for Operations Manager 2016, part of the System Center 2016 suite, and that's what I want to show you today. So let's have a look at what I have in my infrastructure. So we mentioned we've got a plethora of things. We've got hypervisor hosts, and they have their own processors with individual cores. We have amounts of RAM in those boxes. We have a networking requirement for those hosts, and we need storage for them. We can move on to virtual machines, and that list is pretty much the same because, again, they need the same sort of resources. We have services that we provide, things like SIMS, SQL, Exchange, Active Directory, all of those sort of services that the school will rely on that are supported by the things that are on the left-hand side of this slide. And devices, the actual hardware, the servers, switches, routers, access points, printers, telephony now, that sort of thing. So we've got all of this stuff to look at in our schools and worry about. So let's have a chat about what information is useful to me. So in part of troubleshooting problems, it's great to have information. The worst thing is somebody ringing up saying, oh, it's slow or it's crashed, using the word it's rather than my email. When I clicked on new message and clicked that button, then I got an error. God, if only life were like that. But it's slow or it's crashed is probably what you guys hear. So useful information to enable you to troubleshoot stuff is really, really vital. So some good ones, ping, ICMP, can we ping it, is it there? That's really, really useful. That often gives us quite a good clue as to where the problem is if we know that something's not there or not pinging. Is the resource overutilized? So we can really relate to this, can't we? Things like domain controllers, if they haven't got enough memory or CPU, then we're going to start to see slow logon times, slow DNS queries, slow DHCP allocation, all sorts of things like that. So, is that resource that's giving us the problem overutilized? And on top of that, are there enough resources available to make sure that these devices and our resources are utilizing the correct amount of storage, correct amount of RAM? So have we got enough there to give to our resources? Has anything changed recently? God, how many people have said that? What's changed? And again, people normally go, oh, don't know really. Wouldn't it be lovely to know what's changed in an environment? So that's something that would be really useful to us. And things like our key services functioning, I'll show you in the demo in a little bit. Let's say if a spool of services stops on the print server, then, no wonder all the print jobs aren't running, that sort of stuff. Being able to see that very quickly will allow you guys to fix that sort of a problem very quickly. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Operations Manager. What do I need to run it? So in essence, this product scales massively. Like any System Center product, you can start small and grow it to the needs of your environment. So in short, it'll support, you need an SQL server to do the back-end side of things, and you need a server to run Operations Manager on. So the SQL server, that can be physical or virtual. I would imagine people now are going to go for virtual, with 20 gig plus for SQL data. Now, I've said that's quite an open-ended statement. Again, it depends on how much data you're going to be collecting, how many devices there are on your network, and things like how long you want to retain that data in a database. Okay, so that will govern how much space you'll need. SQL 2014 is the supported version of SQL for Operations Manager 2016. It won't work on anything less than that. What you'll see today is based on that hardware and that software. Okay, so the SQL server runs two databases. One's called the Operations Manager database, where all of the configuration, information, and short-term data is kept. You also have something called a data warehouse, which is where your long-term retention lives. So if you want to keep data for a year, perhaps, that's going to be in your data warehouse. And it's not compulsory, but it's a bit of a shame if you don't put reporting services on, because what do we want to be able to do with this data? We want to be able to report on it. We want it to be useful to us. So we put reporting services onto the SQL server. This is fully supported in a cluster environment, so if anybody's clustering SQL, feel free to take advantage of that and have an instance for SCOM or Operations Manager, so you've got some resilience there as well. So the actual SCOM server, I will refer to it, so I always call it SCOM, System Center Operations Manager. Again, it can be physical or virtual, 4 cores, 6 gig of RAM, and around 10 gig of storage for the Operations Manager programs and bins and executables. And the actual Operations Manager software is responsible for managing through agents, which we'll look at in a minute, object discovery and data collection, manual and scheduled reporting. So now I've got all this data, I want to be able to collate it and get some useful information, and visual alerting, primarily through things like dashboards. So take something like, if you ever, who's been to our offices? Anybody come to Parkgate recently? So if you come into our network operations center, you'll see Operations Manager on the wall, and it's big green ticks if it's right, and it's big red crosses if it's wrong. So very visual. If you had something on your wall in your IT suite, if something does go wrong, it's lovely to have a big red cross so you know where to look. And that's what I mean by visual alerting. Okay. So how does Operations Manager work? Just briefly before I dive into the product, we have a discovery phase. So I've got a picture of a server there, a picture of an HP switch, and the failover clustering symbol, because the discovery process is normally done through an agent. So the agent gets installed on what you want to monitor. This is PCs, hardware, servers, this sort of stuff. If it's a switch, you're going to use things like SNMP, as we have done for years. It will support 1, 2, or 3. And then we have agentless monitoring. And this is where, let's, for example, say we have 2 Hyper-V hosts, and they have an agent installed on them to be able to collect data. Now, there are virtual entities that are particular to those Hyper-V hosts, for example, the cluster that they might both be a member of. And that's what we consider an agentless monitoring scenario, where we need to monitor something that's virtual, something like an RDS farm, load balancing, failover gateway services, where we're using virtual objects. So we can have our agents report on things that are agentless to find out what's going on in the background. Then we need to define our scope of monitoring. So once we've installed our agents and we've got them talking to our Operations Manager server, we need to then think about what we want to monitor. Now, there are some very basic things you can monitor out of the box, but the real power of this product comes in something called management packs. And you download management packs for the things you want to monitor. Okay, so I've given you some examples there of Active Directory, SQL, Exchange, but the list is quite literally endless. In fact, there's a company quite a while ago, I was going to show you the video, but I don't think we've got time, where they have a management pack that monitors how much coffee is left in your coffee maker. How good is that? So you can imagine they have the coffee machine with a white background behind it and a camera that monitors how much black is in the picture it's taking. And sure enough, when the coffee cup, when the coffee percolator reaches nearly empty, a big red cross comes up, an ops manager, and someone goes and refills it. So, but I don't use that. I just make someone else make the coffee for me. But management packs are where you're going to want to get the majority of your information from. Okay, so we can create groups. Very similar, Microsoft are very keen for us to put things into groups and assign permissions to groups. Same thing in Operations Manager. So for example, you may have a collection of file servers, you might have a collection of domain controllers, and you want to target various groups of computers. So creating groups is a very important part of the design process and the monitoring process. Overrides, so all management packs typically, are a series of monitors, discoveries, alerts and views that are hard-coded by default. And what we can do is we can create overrides. So the management pack for Windows Server might say, go and check on the processor performance, get counters every 600 seconds, which might not be valid because we might want to know why this server is sporadically being unpredictable. So we might create an override to say, well, actually, I don't want it to go every 600 seconds. I want you to go and find out for me every 10 seconds. And that's an example of a management pack. Okay, alerting, really important. So we can see things going wrong. We want to know they're going wrong. So we can do that with all of the usual methods. Email, very, very important to remember that Operations Manager can use multiple email servers in order of preference. So it would be a shame if we were monitoring Exchange and then using Exchange to move our emails to our alert people. So if Exchange falls over, you've got no email alerting. So we can set a primary alerting mechanism and then start tearing down. If one fails, we can move to the next one on the list. Instant messaging, so we can leverage various instant messaging products. I have never done it, I've read up on it, it's possible. Most people go for the email alerting. SMS, if you've got some sort of a mobile gateway, you can use SMS messages. And of course the dashboard technology, which, not the Medhurst dashboard, this is a SCOM dashboard, but this is the visual screen with the big green ticks and the red crosses. Okay, and then reporting, so we can go away and start to get some really, really clever reports out of Operations Manager as to what's going on in our server estate and our devices. Right, so let's go and have a look at Operations Manager. So bear with me a second while I just change my screen again, and we'll see if this works. Okay, right, so can everybody see that okay? So looks pretty familiar to other System Center products. So we've got, it's a very outlooky screen, if you know what I mean by that. So we have, a window at the bottom there for choosing our different sort of areas in Operations Manager. Very similar to what we're used to in Config Manager and Outlook and VMM and other products from the same family. Okay, so we're starting on the Administration tab. Now, because this is a monster product, I could quite literally stand here for a week and talk to you about it, which I'm sure you don't want me to do, and don't worry, I won't. So what I wanted to do was just sort of go through a run list and just show you the product in a sort of a whirlwind tour, okay? I'm mainly concentrating today on things like storage, things like processing, things like failure, if we can't ping it, if something drops, how do we get alerting, and how we can view this data and manipulate it. So first things first, we're on the Administration tab, and there's our SCOM server. There's only one of them. It's our management server, and that's what all of our agents are going to go and talk back to. Okay, it says warning because it's an evaluation version. I haven't licensed it yet, so there you go. And then we have our agents. Now, this is a lab environment I've built, so it's quite small, but I've got a couple of domain controllers, as you can see there. I've got a file server cluster. N1 and N2 are Hyper-V boxes. N3 is a standalone Hyper-V box. Sorry, N1 and N2 are in a failover cluster. And SQL 2014 is the SQL server that's going to be running all of the back-end stuff for us. Okay, so we were talking about the different types of agent management, so we're looking at agents here, but we talked about agentless. So if I go and have a look at DC1 here and go to security, I have a button here, and that explains agentless communication really well. Allow this agent to act as a proxy and discover managed objects on other computers, so for example, cluster services and things that typically are virtual in nature. Okay, so let's go down to our network management. So this is how we deal with hosts, with agents, and we also want to be able to discover networking devices for those people that haven't got IMC yet or perhaps don't need IMC. Then Operations Manager can go off, you can point it at switches, routers, and you can gain SNMP information from them. So as a result, I've run a discovery, and I'm only including 2 switches on this, and you can see them. Wait a minute, you should be able to see them. There they are. So I've got a 2530, 24 gig, which is my iSCSI switch in this scenario, and I've got a 5406 chassis switch, which I'm using as my core switch. And Operations Manager has discovered both of them. Right, so we've talked about how we can deploy agents. We've talked about how we can discover switching. Now, we need to be able to sort of find out how this information is going to be delivered to us when we want it. And that's all done through notifications. So there's 3 things in here that are important. So we have a channel, and that is essentially how we're going to get this information out of Operations Manager. Where is it going to send it? So this channel I've set up is an email SMTP channel. So it hits one of our SMTP servers in our data center and it gets dealt with there. And this is where I said you can start to have different email servers in order of preference. So if one's not available, it'll move to the next one, so on and so forth. And then we have subscribers. They're the actual physical people, the likes of me and you and anybody else that's on an IT team. Okay, and we can define these all in here. They don't have to be Active Directory users. They can be simple email addresses. So it might be a third-party contractor that you might want to know that the coffee machine needs filling up or something like that. And you can also set these alerts to be time sensitive. So, for example, if I get in at 9 o'clock and go home at 10 o'clock, then I can get my alerts to only give me that information between those 2 times. After the hour of 10 o'clock, I can then make sure somebody else gets it. So quite useful when you've got teams working in the evening and when you've got teams working in the day. And then we have the subscriptions themselves. Now, what we're able to subscribe to is pretty much anything that Operations Manager can discover. Okay, and that's massive. That literally is a wealth of information. And we'll show you how that works in a little while. Okay, so that's the admin side of things. That's how the product's set up, essentially, and how we can get our agents and our networking devices and our agentless devices to be discovered, and we've seen ways that we can give that information out at the end. So let's go and have a look at the monitoring tab now. So if I go, I'm going to start with Windows computers. It's a really good little view, and the thing to remember with Operations Manager, it's very holistic. And what I mean by that is that everything's connected together. So if I'm looking at Active Directory, it might tell me, oh, DC3's got a problem, but it might not be an Active Directory problem. It might be something completely different. Okay, so in this Windows Computers tab I'm in at the moment, I can see that there's a couple of issues, okay? And I want to know what those are. Now, I could go around and dive around on the domain controller and have a look and see what's wrong, or I could use something called Health Explorer, which is built into Operations Manager. So I can right-click any object at any point in the program, and I can go to Open, and I go to Health Explorer, and you can see there it's going to open a Health Explorer for this particular machine. And immediately, right down the bottom, there you go, it tells me what's wrong. And how much time has that saved me? In this instance, it's because the spooler service is stopped. This is a service I've set up specifically to illustrate this. So not only am I monitoring DC3 as an entity, I've also set up a rule that says, right, if any server does not have the spooler service running, I want you to flag alert. And I turn the spooler service off on DC3, hence why there's an alert. You've also got a summary here, which sort of gives you a good sort of indication as what to do next. So here it knows it's dealing with a service problem, so it gives you advice on how to, maybe check that and start it and troubleshoot it to an extent. Okay, I also have the option down here to start the service, straight out of the Health Explorer. So really, within about 3 clicks there, I've just fixed the problem. I haven't actually left my chair, I've been told what's wrong, and very, very quickly indeed, I've been able to go and resolve that. So that service is now being started, and in the next sort of 2 or 3 minutes, that server will become a healthy entity again. Okay? So we all know that SCOM isn't licensed, and that's why that's yellow. But if I go and have a look at the SQL server now, I can see I've got an average wait time issue. And that's because I've let the SQL server be it hasn't got all of the guts it needs, so I can generate things like this. But again, it gives me an idea of what's wrong. And I can also look at, there's always a state change events tab as well. And this tells me when these thresholds have been breached and when they've been acceptable again. Okay, so we can see when it's happened and how it's happened. Okay, so I'm going to leave that one there because that's intentional. Right, so we'll come back to this again. I'm going to sort of jump around a little bit. I have to with this product because of its holistic nature. So next I want to sort of have a quick look at the way that the networking monitoring is done. So all I've done to this point is discovered 2 switches. I haven't done anything else. My switches are what they are. They've got SNMP set up, so they basically send traps to an SNMP host, in this case, operations manager, and that's about the size of it. So I have, out of the box, something called a network summary dashboard, which I really like. It's a really useful piece of, a really useful window. And here I can sort of see nodes with slowest response times. I can see the highest interfaces. Now, because this is a lab environment, there isn't a huge amount of data flying around, so it's just listing 0% on most of these switches. But the whole point of this, let's imagine this was a high utilized port, and I wasn't expecting that. I can then right-click this, again, go to navigation, and I can look at the network interface dashboard. And what this will do is it will show me exactly what's happened on this interface over the last 24 hours, ingress and egress. It shows me my CPU usage, and it will also tell me if there's any sort of CPU issues, ping issues or communication issues, or any errors that have been generated by the switch. And if I come down here, we can see under the instance details, we're looking at port 1, and I can see there's an interface alias there, so node 1, iSCSI1, so this is a SAN port. And if I come down here, I can see that my network utilization for this is 0.2%, so I've got nothing to worry about, okay? But you can imagine these can get, these can get quite high, but it's useful information again. Okay, so that's the network interface dashboard. If I don't want to particularly look at an interface, but I want to look at the network switch or the network object itself, I can look at the network node dashboard. Okay, and this gives me different information. This is more switch specific or device specific rather than port specific. So it gives me some good SLAs. So I can see that over the previous 7 days, 30 days, today and yesterday, I've had 100% SLA on my switches. They haven't failed, they haven't gone wrong, I haven't been receiving any problems with them. On the vicinity view there, it's quite a handy view. If I hit show computers, it'll go off and it will show me the operations manager agents that have been deployed, and it will show me which agents are connected to which switches if I want that information, which is quite handy as well. Has anybody got any questions so far? Please jump in if you need to. Yes?
Just looking at the average response time box down there.
Yes.
And the question is this. Notorious for not reporting proper ICMP response time because the OS prioritizes how reliable is this going to be?
The question was how reliable are things like average response time figures, because switches, you mentioned that it wasn't consistent. You couldn't guarantee that the information that the switch was giving out was accurate. I think that's probably fair for some of the lower end switches, but when you're looking at things like HP, Cisco, other sort of enterprise class switching, and if you look at the data on the switch itself, the two will be, they should be identical. If not, then you know you've got a problem. But to date, I've not seen that, so it's been okay. Right, okay, so let's leave network monitoring. There's a lot more we can do with this, and you can appreciate that I could keep you here for a week, but I don't want to. We haven't got too much time. So I'm going to leave the networking part there and move on. So we talked about management packs. So I just want to sort of show you through some of the management packs. So let's start with Active Directory. So I've gone and installed the management pack for Active Directory, and from this management pack, I get all sorts of information. So management packs tend to be sort of formatted in the same way. So right at the top, you get an active alerts specific to the management pack. So if this active alerts thing at the top here is going to tell me alerts that are specific to my domain controllers and my Active Directory. Okay, I've got DC performance data, so I can start to see all of the performance data that might be relevant to me. So, I might want to see what my general response time is for Active Directory in milliseconds. So, you can start to troubleshoot, the typical long logons, or it's taking me an age to resolve DNS addresses, that sort of thing. Okay, now also it's worth mentioning that on this right-hand pane here, this whole window here is contextual. So what that means is when I select objects, this right-hand window will change depending on the object I've selected. So because I've got a domain controller here, you can notice that you'll see that the tasks on the right-hand side here are relevant to domain controllers. So if I want to go and do a, I don't know, let's have a look. Let's do, what did I say I was going to do? DC diag. So I can instigate from Operations Manager a DC diag task. And there we go. That's sent that off to DC1, has run it, and it's given me the information back so that we can run through this and work out which bits of Active Directory are okay and which aren't. That sort of thing. Okay. We can also do some quite clever things around top 10 events. So if you've got a very busy CPU on a box, for example, you might want to know which are the top consuming processes. So that's something that you can do. It depends on the sort of server you're clicking on to the sort of context menu you're going to get down that right-hand side. Okay, so we also have what are called topology views with this management pack. I quite like these. These are nice and visual, and it's very, very simple. So in this instance, I could quite happily leave it at that because there's a big green tick. I know it's all okay. But I can start to drill down and see all of the parts that make up my Active Directory infrastructure. So, you know, if we start looking at the domain itself, that domain comprises of 2 domain controllers. If I start diving down through the domain controllers, I can start to see all the things that are part of that domain controller, not necessarily related to AD either. So, for example, the Ethernet adapter, okay, you need one for Active Directory, but it's not directly part of the Active Directory installation. Things like your disks, so it's holistic. Just because you're looking at Active Directory, you can still go and look at storage and other things that are related to the domain controllers and machines you're using. Okay, so the next management pack I want to have a look at, and this is a good one, is the Windows Server management pack. This is where I spend a lot of my time, and I do a lot of my reports in this as well. There's a new version that's just come out. It's really, really nice. So let's have a look. So we've got some sort of key stuff in here. So Windows Server operating system state, and I can see here the sort of the agents I got out there, and I can see what versions of Windows they are, which is quite handy. And you can notice there when we were talking about the contextual menu, it's changed again because I'm now looking at different sorts of machines. Okay. So, you know, we were talking about the top CPU consuming processes. I could click that, it'd go off to that SQL server, and in a second it should come back with, you know, the top CPU consuming processes. So if you have something that you suspect is rogue, viruses are probably the obvious one here. Suddenly a domain controller or a machine is really highly utilized. I mean, you don't rule viruses out. So this sort of thing will very quickly show you where your problems are. Okay, so let's start looking down through some of the other information we have here. So we have health monitoring, and then we can come down to some really nice performance metrics here. So if I look at things like cluster disk capacity, and this is one of the ones I want to use today, and this is looking at the disks I'm using in my file server cluster. Okay, not the best of boards, I know, but if you've got a bigger screen, this would be better. But the idea is that very easily I can see my free space in percent, my free space in megabytes, and I can even see the total size of these disks. Okay, and when I start dumping data in a minute, you'll start to see those change quite drastically. And and of course you can amend how quickly this information is collected. Don't forget, each management pack, all of the monitors have a default as to how often they go and collect data, but they can all be amended if need be. So we move down to cluster shared volume, disk capacity. Who's come in the morning and found their cluster shared volumes filled up? Go on, be honest. I have, definitely. There we go. So what happens? All your VMs stop. So this one, for me, is a really, really important one. And this, again, is showing me free space in megabytes, percent, and total size. And I can start to alert on this now. So the management pack that deals with this has thresholds. So you can say, my yellow threshold might be when I get to 60% full. My red threshold might be when I get to 90% full, but you can choose. I mean, normally we like to see, 60, 70% utilization would probably spur the purchase of additional disks or additional storage to make sure that you're okay. But this gives you the instant information. It's really nice. We'll come down to processor performance. Another one, we've talked about processes before. And again, any agent that's been pushed out there, any Windows agent, you can go ahead and start to get processor information. Okay, now a lot of these management packs that I'm opening up, you'll notice that there are windows that are blank. And that's because not everything is enabled in a management pack. The things that you need, or the things that typically you will need, are enabled. But other things like, processor queue length is something that is quite specialized, and as such you might not want to have on. You can imagine if all of the management packs had all of their monitors on, your disk space is going to go through the roof and you're going to need some very powerful servers to run all of it. So they are turned off to save your resources. Okay. So let's have a quick look at an override. So here we're looking at a server called FS1, and what I want to do very quickly, I'm going to go back up to the cluster disk capacity actually and do it from there. So I'm on a server here called FS1. It's a 2016 server, and it's running failover clustering, and it's running a file cluster. Okay. So what I've done, I've got a DVD here, which is 5 or so gig. I'm going to copy that to an F drive. Okay, and that's going to start going to do what it's going to do. But what I'm expecting to see here is my space take a dive in the next sort of 30 seconds to a minute. And we'll refer back to this in a minute, and we should have that information. And don't forget, when this dive happens, we can have alerting that immediately tells us that that's happening, which is really important. It might be a teacher who's just come back from holiday and has got 30 gigs worth of photos they want to put on, and that might just be enough to tip that volume over the edge. So it's something that's very valuable to have. So if we hit F5 a few times, I would imagine that's going to start dropping down in a minute, and we'll see that. But I'll come back to that in a second. Right, so the other thing we talked about, pings. We really want to know if something's there or not. So there's a third-party management pack we use here called OpsLogix. It's a free management pack. You don't have to go and buy it. And what you typically do with this is you nominate a host that's going to do the pinging, or multiple hosts, and then you tell it what you want to ping. Now, the beauty of this management pack is the fact that you don't have to use Windows machines. It literally is anything with an IP address. So that can be a router, it can be a phone, it can be a switch, it can be a host, it can be a Windows machine, it can be pretty much whatever you would like to have. So if I click on my status button here, so bear with me a little bit. It's not what you want to see, is it, on a Microsoft demo? Give it a sec. My hosts have only got one CPU in them, so they're a little slow. But let's see how that copying is doing. Oh, that's nearly there now. Right, here we go. My apologies. So here I can see my pings, and I can see, if I go back to the configuration dashboard, I just want you to see where you can input this data. So here's my source host. So I've chosen SCOM as a source host, but I might want several hosts doing different things for different pinging. I might have a WAN link with a host on the other side that might want to look at a printer. It would be inefficient to do that over the WAN link. You might want a local machine at the other end doing the monitoring for you, so that's why you have that option. And then it's quite literally a case of putting a name in and an IP address. So www.Google, and I could put an IP address in there, hit add, and within the next 30 seconds I'm now monitoring that. Okay? And we can see all these things by going to the status tab. If I hit F5, we can see that Google come online. You can see it's not monitored yet. In the next 30 seconds, that will be. And if I go ahead and turn something off, I will see that happen and I will get an alert. So that's what I want to do now. I'm going to go and turn off, quite rudely, this file cluster server. Okay? There we go. So that's now off. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to go right to the very top of the list here, right to the very top of Operations Manager, and look at the active alerts. And you can imagine this is accumulation of all of the alerts that come in from all the different management packs. And immediately there I can see some information. So my staff cluster, which was on the file server that I've just turned off, that's gone. In fact, that's just come back. There you go, that's a failover cluster working for you. So that's immediately back. But my file server's still off, and I can see that, no ping reply. That's immediate information. And also, hopefully, my phone's just gone, but I've just received an email from the alerting part of Operations Manager, there we go, that tells me that there's no ping reply from FS1. It also tells me that the, oh, wait a minute, wrong one, sorry. It will also tell me when things come back online as well. So what I'll do is I'll go and start that server back up again, and eventually I will get an email going, oh, actually, Dave, everything's okay again, which is nice. There we go, so we'll power that back up again there. Okay, so if we're getting these problems and these alerts, we want to know about them, we need to know how to set up this alerting. So this is a really good base to do it, because active alerts, if you remember, show you everything from all management packs. So any problems with AD or SQL or RDS or IIS will all come in to this, this active alerts page. And from here, so let's say, for example, there we go, it's already telling me that that cluster disk, remember the file I copied? So that's now telling me that that cluster disk is near enough full up. And I want to know about this in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to notification subscription, I'm going to create one, okay? And I want to create this for me. So I then get the chance to give it a name and a description. I'm just going to leave that as blank or a standard for the minute. And then it will automatically go off and realize, because I've clicked on that particular alert, I'm after alerts that are created by a particular rule. And in this instance, it's the cluster disk free space monitor. That's where I want to get my information from, okay? The next section, it will ask me, where do I want to, so who's going to get this information? So I'm going to click on add, I'm going to hit search, I'm going to find me, there could be a list of people in there, I'm going to hit add and click on OK. The next question is going to want to know what I'm going to use to send this data, okay? So remember the channels we were talking about. So because we've got channels defined, I'm going to add one, I'm going to hit search, and I'm going to hit MCL hosting so I can send this email through our mail gateways. And then you've got this thing here, alert aging, and for years I've always wondered what it means, because you can send them without delay, or you can send the alerts after a period of time. I'm assuming that's there to give you enough time to run out the building and get home before you get collared by your staff. Apart from that, I don't know. It's, I think really if an alert happens, you want to know about it pretty quick, don't you? And there we go. That really is quite as straightforward as that. And by just clicking a few buttons from an alert, I know that every time that happens again, I'm going to get that alert, or myself and my team will get that alert. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of other things. I won't be too much longer. I know we're looking to wrap this up. Sorry, Chris.
Can you edit
Yes, you can. The question was, can you modify the message? So if I just bring up the email that's just been sent, there we go. That one tells me that this one's been closed. And this is a very default message. Confusing in places. For example, this bottom bit here is referring to a web link, which doesn't exist because I haven't installed the web services for Operations Manager. But I can tailor my responses for different sorts of alerts. So for example, the alert detail, the alert, the source, the path, the last modified, there's some of that information I might not want, or I might want to elaborate on, so I can go and change that, save that, and it will then work from there on in.
what we've been
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's very similar with this. If that hyperlink at the bottom was live and we had Operations Manager with its web front ends that gives you a web interface as well as the console, then the same process would happen. So that link would take you to the alert, and then you can use the Health Explorer to drill through and find your problem. Okay? Right, so let's have a look at a couple of other things. So I've got service monitoring and web monitoring down here. I was going to show you, I know we're stretched for time, but we can start entering websites, and we can monitor ports on servers, and we can monitor services on servers. So by default, we've already seen the Windows service state. Remember the spooler service that was stopped on that domain controller? I've set up a rule here that says any computer that's running the spooler service, please monitor it and let me know if it goes down. So here we can see all of the spooler services across all of the servers are now clean, as well as that DC3, which is where we had the problem. Do you remember we opened the window and there was an option at the bottom to start the service in the Health Explorer? So that configuration is a result of that now. We can also do website monitoring. We can do that in a couple of ways. There's the very standard "Are you there?" Okay, so I'm using our website as an example, the Medhurst website, www.medhurst-it.com. And I can see immediately there's no problems with that. But I can elaborate on that. I can say, well, actually tell me if it's taking more than 2 seconds to load the page. Or I'm getting a 404 for some reason when I click on that link. So it's going to advise me and tell me. And you can also do things called synthetic transactions. So maybe something like Outlook or Outlook Web Access, which even if the page loads, doesn't necessarily mean the product's working. So you can record a series of web transactions. You can say, right, first I want to go to this address, log in with these credentials, click here, look at that, then sign out. An operations manager will go and carry that synthetic transaction out for you on a schedule. So you know that not only is the website up, but somebody has gone in and done that test every 10 minutes to make sure it's functional. Yes? Say again. No, that's been with Operations Manager. The question was, is that a 2016 feature? It's been with Operations Manager for a while, and it's just got better and better. So if you've got 2007 upwards, you will have it. Yeah.
Is it possible to monitor?
Yes, you can. The question was, can you monitor computers and objects off-site? There is something called an Operations Manager Secure Gateway. So it's a piece of software that you go and install on your non-domain member. We're talking about monitoring things that aren't necessarily in Active Directory. And we use secure certificates and certificate authorities to ensure the communication between a non-domain member and a domain member. In our hosted environment, it's a great example because our domain is MCL hosting, but we have a lot of colo customers that we monitor as well, and they are all separate domains. So each domain that we monitor has a SCOM gateway, and that gateway is then responsible for pushing agents out and for collecting information, then sending it back on a single channel to the Operations Manager server. Yeah? Okay, so that covers that. Now, the only other things I wanted to look at, a real whirlwind tour, I know. I want to show you some of the reports. It's all great having this data. It's all great being able to interrogate this, but let's make it useful. Let's start to see things that we can hand to our leadership team and go, look, here you go. The IT is brilliant. Here's the stats, that sort of stuff. So there are a number of things, going back to contextual menus again. So if I look at Windows computers, I always pop back to this, and we can see here that we've got a number of options with our tasks down the right-hand side. But here, look at all these are the report tasks that are particular to this sort of object. So there's a couple of favorites here, which I'll show you. So let's take DC3 as an example. We talked about the things that are important to us when we're troubleshooting. The whole what's changed thing is a real sort of a black art, isn't it? What changed? I don't really know. Well, this is what this will give you. So as soon as Operations Manager discovers a server, any changes on that server that happen over the server's lifetime, Operations Manager will capture for you. Okay, and it will display this it's using SQL reporting, so it's all quite straightforward to use. Everybody should be familiar with it. And you just plumb in some really specific information. For example, what's my start date and finish date? So I can say, actually, I want to look at from Monday last week till today. We can see that we're using DC3 as our object here. That's what I want to interrogate, and I'm going to hit run. And that goes off, queries the Operations Manager databases, and uses SQL reporting services to give me, hopefully. There we go. And this is a breakdown of what's happened to this machine since Operations Manager discovered it. And we can see it's discovered it as a virtual machine. It tells us where it's installed the agent. It tells us which Active Directory site it lives. It tells you the DNS domain names, the forest names, the host server, because this is a VM, so this is sitting on a host. It's also giving me physical processor information, changes to the name of the machine. So a lot of information here, and this will change depending on what machines you're looking at. But I think that's quite a good starting point when you're looking at what's changed. Oh, hang on a minute, I can see the IP address has changed. That's why there's a problem. It might be something as simple as that.
Does that cover software changes?
Not so much software, then you'll be into sorry, the question was, does it cover software changes? That's more of a config manager piece. Some of the guys at the back, Craig, you put your hand up, Craig? Craig's a config manager guru. So if you want to go and have a chat to Craig about sort of auditing of software and asset management, that's a config manager piece. And I know he'll love to talk to you about that. So that's a configuration changes report. We can also go straight to the reporting tab, and we can start to have a look at creating reports that just happen for us, that get scheduled, that get scheduled and put somewhere. And one of my favorites, which I think I'll finish with, is the top 10 Windows hosts. And what I want to know from here, in my infrastructure, which are the top busiest hosts on a number of different objects. So for example, I pretty much want to know how my processors are, how my memory is, sorry, that's not grammatically correct, disk space, network usage, and all that sort of thing. And this is what this report will give me, okay? So I can see the busiest machine in the infrastructure is the SCOM server, so its average utilization, 9%. But I can start to see, let me make that a little bit smaller so people can see it. So I can see the average percent space used on my disk. I can see how busy my disks have been. I can start to see how busy my RAM is, how much RAM I'm using on a typical basis. I can also sort of see information about disk speed transfers, network adapter usage, both virtual and physical network adapters. Some really useful information that I think you'll agree, if you look at it, you go, oh, actually that server is red all of the time. It has been for the last 3 months. Maybe I'll upgrade it or change it out or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there only because I know we're pushed for time. What I will say is that we're very keen for people that want to come and see more about this to come in and physically use this software. We've got an innovation centre with dedicated kit for this, and it means that if there's a particular area that you'd like to look at or a particular piece of software such as Operations Manager, come in, we'll get a sandwich, pizza, Indian, Chinese arranged. Just come in and play with it, use it, get familiar with it. And from that experience, a lot of people find that they're able to place the product better into their environment. The danger with Operations Manager is trying to do too much with it. You can really flood your environment with alerts and you'll just lose the will to live. So it's better to start small, get things licked, and then move on from there. So if anybody wants to look at Operations Manager in more detail, come and see me afterwards, and we can book a technology morning, and we'd be delighted to have you. Does anybody have any questions before I hand back over to Charlie? Yes?
What's the upgrade path from 2012?
From 2012, sorry, the question was, what's the upgrade path from Operations Manager 2012? It is in place, but what we've got to bear in mind at the moment, this is a technology preview, so I suppose the caveat around that is it's subject to change. This installation was done as a fresh installation, but the upgrade path is supported from the original. Yes, sorry.
What's the cost?
It depends. Okay, we're all education in here, apart from you, unlucky. So if you're not education, it's about £1 million. If you are educational, then you buy you buy it in data center edition or standard edition. And if you buy it in data center edition, you're buying it for the hosts that it's going to run on, typically the Hyper-V host that you're using. And data center, as well as Windows data center licensing, so when it comes to system center data center licensing, it's unlimited. You can use what you want. So, yeah. Anybody else? No, I think we're there. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for all your attention. Thank you again for coming. Charlie, can I hand back over to you for the prize draw? Thank you, everybody.